Some of you have already been to this first event. This is our second session of the workshop, Retirement 101. And my name is Brenda Burkholder. I'm the marketing director at Nichols Village in Groveland. We're an independent living community for people who are 62 and better. Today, we gather together 12 professionals to provide resources to you so that you can prepare for your next lifestyle change or retirement. We say knowledge is power. So ask the questions during the session here. If you have any questions, just raise your hand. And then our facilitator, who happens to be
Kathleen D'Amico from Edgewood.
Yep. And she will be a facilitator and moderate questions. And she will repeat questions too, because we're actually recording this as well. I didn't say this in the first session, for the cable television in Newburyport, and perhaps other towns will pick it up too, because this is important information for people to hear about. So Nichols Village, as I said, is an independent living community. We are expanding and many others are expanding. Edgewood is expanding, as well as Atria, Nichols Village, and Avita just is brand new to Newburyport a couple of years now. And so what's happening is the baby boomers are becoming of age to move into the next lifestyle change, retirement. And so we are all scrambling to make room for everybody. And there's all different levels of community, retirement communities. So it's important to do the research and find out what's best for you. So this is going to be 40 minutes. I talk a couple minutes here. Kathleen, you can talk for a couple minutes and then introduce both of our professional resource people. Okay? Okay, thank you. Great.
Thank you, Brenda. So again, my name is Kathleen D'Amico. I'm the marketing director at Edgewood Retirement Community in North Andover. Edgewood has been there, we're in our 21st year. We started out independent living community with the Meadows Health Center, which is short-term rehab and long-term nursing care. We just recently built the Woodlands Inn, which is our answer to assisted living. We offer enhanced living as well as memory support. And we decided we wanted to make it a little different. And instead of building a facility, if you will, we built 4 households. And each house has 10 private rooms, joined by a great room, a salon, a rehab gym, and surrounded by conservation land. Edgewood's history, we are a not-for-profit. And we have a little over 200 apartment homes and 24 cottage homes. We are governed by a voluntary board of trustees made up of businessmen and women from the greater community, as well as 3 residents who live at Edgewood. So the residents truly have a voice there, and they're able to help us out with enforcing policies and procedures, and basically the operations and the lifestyle there. A lot of people say, well, what is a Ccrc? A Ccrc, it's one of the acronyms that we use in the industry, is a continuing care retirement community, or also known as a life care, or the newest term is life plan. So the goal is, come in while you're still independently living, take advantage of all the benefits, the amenities, the programs, the entertainment, lifelong learning. As your needs change, there's a service or a staff member every step of the way. So everything's located on one campus, and once you're there for life. So we like to think of it as a really fun place. We have a couple of our residents here that have joined us at the event. If you want to come to ask them any questions about the lifestyle. But certainly I think you're going to learn a lot of information here from the professionals that we have on site. And hopefully, if it's not Edgewood, have a plan. Have something in place so when the time comes, you'll be able to ease into that transition. So I'm very happy to announce the 2 speakers we have with us here today. Attorney Ann Katzis. She is an estate planning attorney here, right in Newburyport. as well as Celeste Ricci Trahan, who is out of Hampton Falls, yes. She is a lifestyle consultant and, she is an aging life care manager, and she is with Ccrc Senior Resources. So they're going to talk a little bit about the services that they offer, and again, please feel comfortable to ask questions and address any concerns you might have, as I believe you'll be able to find a lot of helpful information today. So, Anne?
Sure, thank you. Thank you for coming. So, I am an estate planner. So what does that mean? Basically, as an estate planning lawyer, broadly speaking, I'm trying to do two things. First of all, I'm trying to help my clients get documentation in place so that at their death, whenever that might be, their assets, whatever those assets might be, pass to the people or the organizations they want them to pass to, and those assets pass as efficiently as possible. And when I say efficiency, I mean both tax efficiency and administrative efficiency. Because when someone dies, there can be tax issues, and we try to proactively address those issues as much as we can at the planning stage. But there are also administrative issues. It can be very simple to settle an estate after someone dies, or it can be very complicated. And whether the situation is simple or complicated depends a lot on the planning that you do in the estate planning phase. So I try to get things buttoned up so that people can rest assured that at their death, whenever that might be, everything is going to pass as efficiently as possible the way they want it to pass. So that's one part of what I do. The second part of what I do as an estate planner is I try to get documentation in place for my clients so that if there ever comes a time when they are living but unable to take care of themselves, somebody can step in and take care of things for them. So for example, sometimes people might become ill, they might be incapacitated, they might have to go to a hospital or a rehab for a number of months. They need someone to step in and take care of things for them. Or as people age, perhaps they develop memory issues, they develop dementia, or they develop Alzheimer's disease, and again, they can't take care of their own affairs. We want to make sure that there is documentation in place so that someone can step in and handle the financial decision-making, handle the personal decision-making, handle the healthcare decision-making without having to go to court. Because if you don't have documentation in place and there comes a time when you are incapacitated, then you have to go to court and have someone appointed as a guardian, and you don't want to have to do that. It's very complicated. Whereas there is planning we can do in the estate planning phase that makes that very simple. Someone can just step in and act for you without any court involvement at all. So in a nutshell, that's what I do as an estate planner, and in the Q&A session we can go into more detail about how that all works.
Excellent. And Celeste, sorry.
And now we have Celeste Ricci Trahan.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming today also. Glad to have you here. So my background as a social worker for 30 years in medical social work brought me to this place where I am now an aging life care professional. So what is an aging life care professional? Well, we were also known as geriatric care managers a few years ago, and we underwent a bit of a name change because we were being confused with other different titles that started popping up, people that did similar tasks as us. Senior care advisors, assisted living locators, case managers. But as an aging life care manager, we are part of a association, national association, where we need to be certified. So the majority of the folks who do this type of work are either RNs, master's level social workers, or therapists. So what sort of qualifies us to do this, and what do we do? So as a medical social worker, I've worked in hospital work, I've worked in long-term care, I've worked in home care and hospice, as I said, for 30 years. I'm also a certified care manager, which meant that I had to take an exam to be a care manager. And I'm also a member of an organization in Massachusetts called Honoring Choices, which is an organization dedicated to educating consumers about advanced care directives, as Ann was talking about. And we can certainly talk about that further at some point if you're interested. So as an aging life care professional, what we do is basically we get many of our referrals from adult children who are either out of state or very busy working in their own lives. We can get referrals from hospital discharge planners, trust officers, and attorneys who basically are seeing something in the elder's life that may need some further attention than perhaps they are getting at this point. So what we do is to meet with the client and or the family or whoever are the concerned individuals involved, and we try to create a customized care plan for that elder. And what we do is we look at things from a number of perspectives. So we're looking at things from a physical, a medical, emotional, social, religious, financial, and geographic points of view. We try to assemble all of that information from the family and whoever else might be involved with the client, and try to just create a plan that ultimately will give them safety, comfort, and happiness as they go further in the aging cycle. So what we do is we can talk about a home care plan, we can talk about an assisted living or an alternative living situation for that person, or we can just, my model myself is that I can just go in and just do the assessment, and sometimes the families themselves just wanted sort of a check-in. Do we know about everything that's available? Is there anything I'm not thinking about? And I may not hear from them for a while, or maybe not at all, because they may choose to do the legwork on the recommendations that we come up with. So it's a very involved process. I consider myself more of a broker, advocate, counselor, facilitator. There's lots of different names I can give myself. Aging life care professionals also vary a little bit in what they do with their clients. Personally, myself, I can also take people to their medical appointments and interpret that medical information for the families. I have been involved with situations that need downsizing, relocation, family mediation, family support. So there's lots of different areas where we can be effective. But each aging life care professional can be a little bit different. I also choose to be with my clients on call for 24/7. I know that sounds a little unrealistic, but I maintain a pretty small, customized practice. So some aging life care professionals don't choose to do it that way. So there's lots of different factors in terms of choosing someone. But basically that is what we do. And that's a little about me and aging life care professionals.
Excellent, thank you, Celeste. So do we want to start it off with some questions for either Ann or Celeste about estate planning or the care manager field and how that might help you or loved ones? Feel free to raise your hand and ask questions as we go along. All right. Well, I could start off with Ann. A lot of times, I know specifically with my own family members, there was a question on whether or not the individual needed a trust or not. Some people think you have to have lots of assets to do that. Can you elaborate on that, please?
Sure, so let's talk a little bit about different ways that property passes when someone dies. Because I think when a lot of people think of estate planning, they think of a will. They think, oh, I need a will. And they figure if they have a will, that takes care of everything. That's actually not necessarily the case. Because as I say, different categories of property pass in different ways. So for example, if you own property jointly with someone, if you're married and you own property jointly with a spouse, or sometimes an elderly person will own a bank account or a checking account jointly with an adult child, Typically, at the death of the first owner, the survivor gets the asset. You don't need a will to make that happen. Even if you had a will that said something different, it doesn't matter. Just by virtue of the joint ownership, that serves to pass the asset. Some asset categories do not pass under a will. They pass under different pieces of paper. So those pieces of paper are often called beneficiary designation forms. So for example, if you have a retirement account, if you have a 401k from your job or from a prior job, or if you have an IRA, those assets typically are governed by separate beneficiary designation forms. And these are forms that are not generated by a lawyer, they're generated by whoever holds the assets. So if you have an IRA with Fidelity, Fidelity has a form, or if you have an IRA with Schwab, they have their own form. If you have a beneficiary designation in place, that is what governs the disposition of that asset. Again, even if you have a will, it doesn't matter. Life insurance, if anyone still has life insurance, that is also governed by beneficiary designation forms. Typically, when you get a policy in place as part of the account opening paperwork, your insurance agent will give you a form to fill out. It says who the beneficiaries of the life insurance are going to be. If you have a form in place, that is what governs the life insurance. Again, you don't need a will. Even if you had a will that said something different, it doesn't matter. So what does that leave? Basically, property that you own in your sole name, not in joint names, but in your sole name, and that does not have a beneficiary form attached to it. That is property that might pass under a will if you have one, or it might pass under a trust. So what's the difference? In many ways, wills and trusts are sort of similar in that these are documents that say what you want to have happen to property at your death. A will is a document that can pass property. The one thing about a will is that even if you have a valid will in place and it was signed and notarized and everything is fine, a will is not a fully valid document until it has gone through a process called probate after your death. So what is probate? Probate is a proceeding through which a local county probate court approves a will. Basically, the court, after someone dies, has to go through a process of saying, okay, this will is valid, and the person that is named as in the will as the personal representative or executor, that's the person who's going to administer estate, and estate can go ahead and administer the property. So probate, people hear horror stories about probate. There are lawyers out there who will tell you it's awful and you should avoid it at all costs. Personally, I think the probate system in Massachusetts is pretty good. It tends to be pretty efficient, but at the same time, it is a procedure. It does take some time, it does take some money. So some people want to avoid probate altogether. One way that you can avoid probate with respect to these assets that you own in your own name that don't have beneficiary designations is you can create a trust. So in a nutshell, what distinguishes a trust is that legally speaking, there are two parties involved. There's someone called a trustee, and there's someone called a beneficiary. The trustee is like the manager of the property. This is the person who legally owns the property and manages it and invests it and decides whether or not to make distributions to the beneficiary. And the beneficiary is the person who can actually get assets from the trust. When we're creating, maybe you've heard of revocable trusts, that they're a pretty common form of a pretty common document to use in estate planning. If you create a trust as part of your estate plan, while you are living and well, you are both the trustee and the beneficiary. For all practical purposes, the property is still yours. Even if you put assets into the name of your trust, those assets are yours. You can spend them, invest them, do whatever you want with them. Where having assets in a trust can make a difference is at your death, the assets that are in the name of the trust do not have to go through probate. Trusts are not subject to probate, whereas wills are subject to probate. So in a trust, you will typically name someone as your successor trustee. Immediately after your death, that person can deal with those assets. If they need access to the cash to pay your bills, they have immediate access to the cash. If they want to put real estate on the market, they can do that immediately. They don't have to wait for any kind of probate proceeding to end. So in a nutshell, that's one reason that a trust can be useful. Sometimes people call me and they'll say, oh, hi, my name is Jane and I need a trust. My response is always, well, maybe you do and maybe you don't. Let's sit down and talk and look at your particular situation. Because not everybody needs a trust, but it can be helpful in some situations for a variety of reasons.
Yeah, hi, Ann. On a life estate, where does the life estate fall as far as ownership for that person who has the life estate against the property? How does that work?
How does a life estate work in regards to a trust when it comes to property?
Right, and ownership?
In ownership of that?
Yes.
Okay, so life estate, let's talk about what that is. Sometimes you own a piece of property yourself. You own it now, and then at your death, it's going to be yours to do whatever you want to do with it. Sometimes, for a variety of reasons, people during their lifetime split the ownership of their property. They keep what we call a life estate for themselves, which means that for the rest of their life, they can use this property. But they give away what we call the remainder interest, which means that today they're setting things up so that they have set in stone who is going to get this property at their death. We often see this with real estate. So for example, sometimes people will write a new deed saying, okay, I own this house, but now I am giving ownership of the remainder interest to my child or whoever you want that to be, but I'm retaining a life estate, which means I have the legal, even though I don't own the home anymore, I have the legal right to use the home for the rest of my life. So basically, ownership is split. Legally speaking, one person has the right to use the property for the rest of their lifetime, and someone else gets the property at their death. That is a different thing than a trust. A trust sort of does the same thing. You can put assets into a trust that says, okay, I can use the assets during my lifetime, and at my death they go to my children or whoever you want them to go to. One thing that's different about a trust, though, is typically trusts are revocable and amendable. If you set up a trust today and 5 years from now you change your mind, you want someone else to be the beneficiary than the person you originally named, no problem. It's very easy to amend a trust. With a life estate, typically the person that you have named as the beneficiary after your death is set in stone. I suppose you might not be able to do a new deed naming someone else unless that remainder beneficiary agrees to it.
On the life estate, with the person holding the life estate, does that affect how the deed is recorded? Do they still hold title to that? And then upon their death, it reverts to that other person?
I'll repeat that question. So basically, the question is, if you retain a life estate, who owns the property legally? Legally speaking, it's the person we call the remainderman, or the remainder person who owns the property, but they own it subject to your retained life estate. So that's one important thing to think about is when you have a life estate, you're not really the owner of the property anymore. You simply have rights in what is now somebody else's property.
I don't remember calling your name, but I have a question for you.
Okay, Celeste?
Celeste, I
Celeste.
apologize. Are there any sort of regulations in terms of states or licensing that you have to have in order to work with somebody in Phoenix or New Hampshire or Massachusetts?
The question is, does your license go across different states to work with different individuals and families?
So aging life care professionals are individually licensed, but they're not state licensed by the association that we belong to. In other words, there's a national organization called the Aging Life Care Professional Association. Aging life care professionals can either choose to belong to that or not. It's within our best interest to belong to that because we are then certified, and it really sort of cements our credibility, if you will. But there's no state, like I have a license to practice social work in the state of New Hampshire and Massachusetts, but we're not required as life care professionals to be licensed. So what we have is several bodies that certify us. So there's 3 different kinds of certifications. There's one through our social work organization, through NASW, and then there's one through the National Academy of Certified Care Managers. And there's a CCM and a CMC certification through those, so it's a little complicated. But you always want to ask life care professionals if they are certified as a care manager. That carries a little more weight in terms of their knowledge base and their expertise. But from a state-to-state perspective, there's no licensing requirements for us. Does that
Yeah, it
answer?
does, yeah.
Any other questions? I have a question, Celeste, in regards to covering the cost for your services. Can you explain a little bit about how that works, and is it covered by insurance if an adult child or an individual wanted to work with you?
Sure. So we are we bill privately on a fee-for-service basis across the board. But some people do have long-term care insurance policies, and those policies do have a provision for care management. I haven't run into a lot of them over the years, but there are a few. John Hancock and Prudential, I think, were a few that I've run into, but there's lots of policies out there, so if someone had a long-term care policy, I'd be happy to review it. I've looked at hundreds over the years to see if that might cover. In most cases also, we can, the elder can use our services as a tax deduction, as a medical tax deduction, so we have found that as well.
Even under the new tax code?
Under the new
As far as I know, as far as I know. I mean, I'll find out for sure as we go forward. I would always advise people to check with their individual accountant. But for the most part, yes, my clients are able to do that, yes.
I think Ann wants to add to that a bit.
Yeah, I believe, and again, ask a CPA, but I believe under the current tax laws, you can still deduct medical expenses if they reach a certain threshold of your, what we call adjusted gross income.
Has that been raised to 10%?
I think it has. The percentages, I believe, are going to change, and this is one of those provisions that might be disappearing in a year or two, so stay tuned. But I think at least under certain circumstances, you can still deduct medical expenses.
Sure.
I have a question for you as
Yes.
far as long-term care insurance. If a person is in the independent apartment at Edgewood, I'm assuming long-term care insurance doesn't cover any of that. But once they move into assisted living, would long-term care insurance be able to kick in?
So the question was, if you're a resident living at Edgewood and independent living, would your long-term care insurance cover that monthly fee, or do you have to wait until you go to the next level of care? So there's two options actually at Edgewood. If you're living in an independent apartment and you do require some services, we have a group employed by Edgewood that would come straight to your apartment or cottage home. It's called Resident Services. Most of, actually all of the long-term care vendors that we've worked with in the past have covered that assistance.
That would be the same as somebody coming into your own home before you move into a place.
Correct.
Yeah.
Well, yes, it's, so you have an option. You can stay in your apartment as long as it's still appropriate and you're safe. You can have those services brought in and your long-term care insurance would cover it. Or you have the option of moving into the next level at the Woodlands Inn.
Okay, so that next level, does long-term care insurance cover any of that?
Yes, and I'll have Celeste elaborate on that for you.
Actually, I've looked at many long-term care insurance policies over the years, both for, for home care, for hospice, and just in general. So I really like looking at them because they're very interesting depending on how they're written. So the face page will tell you pretty much, first of all, there's an elimination period on long-term care insurance. You always need to look for that first. It's either 7 days, 30 days, 60, 90, typically, before you can even dip into the long-term care insurance policy. The second piece that's really important to those policies are the definitions of what they cover. So I have seen some that cover, assisted living, but then you need to look at the definition of what assisted living is. Some of them cover home care services. you need to see what the definition is of that. Some of them cover adult daycare. Again, it's the definition. And then there's a cap on what they cover.
Yeah.
So depending on what the definition is of those services, that's how you can negotiate with your long-term care insurance policy as to what services they might cover, particularly in an assisted living, in a CCRC, in home care. I'll never forget the one policy I looked at, that people paid premiums for a very long period of time. All they wanted it for was for nursing home placement, and it clearly said on the face page, this does not cover skilled nursing care. And they paid for it for years. So it's really important to look at that face page, look at the caps that it's providing, and look at the definitions within the policy itself. And if you believe that your policy is going to cover any portion of that, the first thing you want to do is initiate a claim, get a claim going, get the paperwork going, because that's the biggest part that really, takes time to get in motion. So that's what I can say about that.
So if what you're saying is that some policies would cover up to a cap of assisted living, which would be the assisted living piece of Edgewood, but some policies may not.
Depending on what your definition of assisted living is. I mean, there are some,
They're very clever in how they're
they
written.
are. I mean, not to knock the insurance agency, but insurance is insurance. They look to just to not pay. I mean, I don't want to say it like that, but you need to look at the policy. Each individual policy is so different. And some of them were written so long ago that what you think is going to cover, particularly like home care in a home, might cover an average of 4 hours a day. Many people need many more hours than that. So it's just important to familiarize yourself with it. If you think it's going to be in motion in the future, to initiate that claim, to kind of get things going.
One question I always have in regards to legal paperwork is with healthcare proxies and power of attorneys, we're diligent about having our residents fill those out or bring copies when they move into Edgewood. Sometimes they say, should it be the same people in the healthcare proxy versus the power of attorney? What's your response to that?
Yeah, so let me just talk a little bit more about what those documents are. A healthcare proxy, as the name suggests, deals only with medical decision making. So in a healthcare proxy, you are naming someone who's going to be authorized to make medical decisions on your behalf if and only if you are ever in a position where you can't communicate your own healthcare wishes. So for example, let's say you've been in an accident and you're unconscious, or maybe you're intubated and you literally cannot speak for yourself. The person you name in your healthcare proxy would be authorized to approve blood transfusions, authorize surgery, do whatever needs to be done for you medically. Or, we often see this with the aging population, if you develop dementia to the point where your medical providers feel that you cannot speak appropriately on your own behalf, they will invoke the healthcare proxy and they will have your healthcare agent make medical decisions for you. The other thing you can do in a healthcare proxy, you don't have to, but it is an option, is if you have strong feelings about end-of-life care, how much medical intervention you would or would not want if you're ever terminally ill or permanently unconscious, you can put those wishes into your healthcare proxy, and the person who is acting on your behalf will be guided by those wishes. So the healthcare proxy deals with healthcare decision-making. Power of attorney deals with pretty much everything other than healthcare decision-making. So in the power of attorney, you're naming someone who will be authorized to make personal and financial decisions on your behalf. Someone who could write checks for you, pay your bills, deal with your insurance company, whatever comes up in day-to-day life. The two skill sets are quite different. Under a power of attorney, the person who's acting on your behalf will be dealing with mostly financial type things. So you want someone who is organized, who's trustworthy, who's good with money, or can handle financial matters and so on. A healthcare proxy, in my opinion, is quite different. You're asking someone to make healthcare decisions for you, potentially make end-of-life care decisions for you. That's more of a personal, emotional thing than a power of attorney. So you might name the same person, or you might name different people, just because, in my opinion, the roles are very different.
Yes.
I just want to also say something about the healthcare proxy as well. Many people ask me and say to me that they have a healthcare proxy in place. The healthcare proxy can only be utilized when it's activated by a physician. So I want people to keep that in mind. Many people just say, well, I have my documents in place. That's great. But if you want to act on someone's behalf to make their healthcare decisions, the next step in the process is that that healthcare proxy would need to be activated by the person's physician in order for you to be able to make those decisions.
And just to remind everyone, both Anne and Celeste have tables right next door here in the resource room. So if you have questions that you didn't want to ask within the group setting, please feel free to access their tables and have a one-on-one conversation and any other concerns or questions you might have. Does that work?
Yes, that's awesome. Thank you, ladies. And also, we're going to take a 15-minute break, and our next session will begin at 11:50. A senior living locator and home health care provider will be in here to give you information about that. So thank you very much, everybody, and take a break.